evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and in what was a tale of two halves, it was the Demons who stamped their authority on the match, taking another top 8 scalp to further stake their claim at the top of the ladder and bolster their credentials as a genuine contender for September glory. Here at the Demonland podcast, we're keeping that lid closed, well, perhaps slightly ajar and taking it 1 week at a time. Joining me tonight, long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, everyone in Demonland and 11 wins. And when we're talking about lids, I'd like to quote old D during the week, who said that councils throughout Melbourne are complaining to the Melbourne Football Club about the lids that are littering the streets. So
I saw a funny tweet. Someone had said, you know, the Demons lids well and truly off. I saw a guy going for a run in his full demon attire, and then he mentioned that he lives in Brooklyn, New York. So
good to hear.
I read that, and he said that he was in the full Melbourne playing kit, not just attire.
Yes, that's what I meant.
On that, I had a vision of someone in Melbourne footy socks and shorts, and hopefully the Indigenous jumper. That would have been impressive.
Wasn't that Indigenous? And welcome to you, Bin Man. Welcome. Good evening.
Andy, good evening, Demonlanders and George.
How awesome is that Guernsey? I really, really like it. I think it's one of the best Indigenous. I've loved all the Indigenous ones, but that was certainly one of the best.
Oh, it was fantastic, wasn't it? It was just really magnificent jumper, and I'm definitely going to get one.
Yeah, apparently they're all sold out from what I've heard, so good luck trying to source one. I'm sure they'll make it available at some point again because it was a beauty.
Yeah.
All right, guys, this was... before I start that, you want to give us a call tonight, talk about anything that we're going to chat about tonight? Lots to talk about. 03 9016 3666 03 9016 3666. Give us a call or join us in the chat room, demonland.com/podcast. Guys, this was the definition of a game of two halves, as I mentioned at the top of the show. Our first half was riddled with errors, atrocious entries, I thought, into the forward 50, being well beaten in the clearances and losing the aerial battle with the Lions up forward in their forward line. I thought that the scoreline to halftime flattered us and we could easily have been down by more. We were 20 points down at the main break, and that was on the back of having 14 less inside 50s, 18 less clearances, 11 less contested possessions, and 656 less stoppage metres gained. Conversely, we came out after halftime a completely different team, hell-bent on avenging, and I quote Christian Petracca, a boring style of play. We produced a 42-point turnaround, won the inside 50s by 17, the clearances by 10, the contested possessions by 17, and the stoppage metres gained by 756, and the net result was a 22-point win, which I thought flattered the Lions. I really thought we could have beaten them by more. Big Man, I thought I would get your thoughts on what was happening in the first half, and then George, perhaps get your thoughts on what happened to turn it around. So take it away, Big Man.
Yeah, I mean, just sort of before going through that first quarter, before the game, I was thinking in terms of, I was really surprised that the bookies had them as favourites. And you know, obviously the betting line is not the be all and end all, but it's generally a pretty accurate guide. I would have had as favourite coming into that match because we were just basically the form side. I know they'd won 7 straight, so they're clearly in form, but they've only won the 2 games they'd only won the 2 games outside of Queensland, and that remains the same. We're 10-1. The only game we lost was a point. We're the best side in the competition, having beaten 3 of genuine flag contenders and 4 if you count the Swans. I thought the dimensions of the Giants Stadium would suit us as well, at least in terms of how we can set up our defence and our structure. It's a bit longer than the G, but it's only 128 wide as opposed to the G being 138 wide. So I figured that the Lions would find it hard to transition and get through our zones, just like the Dogs did, and that, you know, again, we'd look to block the corridor. And, you know, I was a bit sort of confused or surprised that we weren't favourite because we're the benchmark. And I thought, you know, they're the challengers. So, you know, I think that as I said last week, one of the advantages that we have, and we have it over every other team, I think, is that teams find it hard to negate our strength where we can negate other teams' strengths much more effectively. So whilst they play a bit differently to the Bulldogs, they're more deliberate, less frenetic. And we saw that in the game. They're more patient in the way they move the ball. But their key strength is to score from stoppages, but their focus is stoppages around the ground as opposed to set and clear stoppages. So my thought was that if we could stop that and halve our round the ground stoppages at the very least, then we'd go a long way to winning that game because we're taking away their strength. I mean, our strength is our defensive structure, and of course you could do what they ended up doing, which was try to negate that by running someone on lever, looking to shut Salem out of it. But their deliberate ball movement, the way they moved the ball was really about making sure that they didn't dump kick it into our back half. So I think at the end of the first half, perhaps at the end of the first quarter, we only had 2 intercept marks, which was just, in their planning. That's what they would have planned for. Takes Lieber out of it, takes May out of it. But, that's a sort of defensive, that's stopping a defence is harder than, less impactful than stopping an offence. So if we could, in coming to the game, if we could stop them scoring around the from stoppage clearances, much less focus on the sort of send and clearances than we did against the Dogs, then they'd struggle to score. And there's no reason why we wouldn't match any team around the ground stoppages really with our midfield and with Max. But for me, all of that was predicated on us bringing the pressure and the defensive spread. So for me, that was what happened in the first half, is that I think with stats, it's quite interesting looking at stats, but I think it's better to look at stats as a symptom, not a cause. The clearance number, they're a clearance team and they just couldn't really generate scores from their clearances. So, and the critical thing coming into the game, I thought, would be winning contests. This season, the Lions ranked 4th for contested possessions, 7 more contested than the opposition, but we're 3rd and we averaged 12, so that's 5 more contests. So for me, it was all about who would win the contest, and that if we could stop them scoring around the stoppage and win the contest and bring our defensive running and spread, would be too good for them. But in short, what happened in that first half is that we didn't win the contests. And I think that it's really hard to see on television, as we've said any number of times, but I just don't think our defensive spread was there. We weren't running as hard as we have done to cover. I feel like our defensive back half is was a little bit at sea there for a little while. And I wonder, with the way they've brought Petty in, that they seem to be a bit more fluid, who plays on who. It seems to be less sort of the same each week, and you could see it sort of Petty ended up on McStay a few times and Hipwood, and they were rotating those players. And Bailey really had an amazing first half, and I think that sort of small forward is a real always been a problem for us, and with Hibbert having to play on Cameron, that left Bailey up and about by himself, and he was amazing in that second half. He had to half-time, he had 12 disposals, 83% efficiency, 5 inside 50s and 3 goals. And 2 of those goals were really, one was brilliant where he kicked it out of the air, but both his first 2 goals, really, he was just given way too much space. So, but the thing that I thought, Andy, was that really kept us in the game was only being 20 points down. So I think that, whilst you could say, well, we should have been further ahead, I think it's a credit to our system and how we played that we weren't. That Brisbane have outscored its opposition by 15 points per game from clearances this season, and almost all of them from around the ground, which is number 2 in the AFL. But at halftime, despite their dominance around the ground in clearances, in the centre, where we definitely gave them up, our focus is on the thing, they only scored 3 more points. They had 2 goals, 3-15 at halftime from stoppages to our 2 goals. And the other thing they couldn't do is turn their dominance of their inside 50 count. They had pretty much from the 10-minute mark of the first quarter, they dominated possessions. I think in that next 10 minutes of play, they had 31 to 13 disposals. They dominated the inside 50 count, 10-3, I think, in that quarter. In that little burst, but they could only score 2 goals from that dominance. So part of that's our shape, part of that's how we held up. So I think really, in some ways, whilst we're brilliant in that second half, we won that game by only being 20 points down at half time. I think 2 years ago we would have been 6 or 7 goals down at that point. For them to dominate the stats like the way they did and only being 20 points down, and it wasn't as if they missed shots. They kicked some beautiful goals. Hipwood's goal from outside 50 was amazing. I think the main thing that, their other strength is their marking up forward. They've got a fantastic forward line. That's why they're averaging 95 or 96 points a game. If you look at it, the way they scored, a lot of their marks were the kick inside 50 was under a little pressure. So I think we weren't so good this week. We've been brilliant at setting up on the mark and having a player on the corridor, being really quick to run to the player and put pressure on them. A lot of their kicks inside 50 that got marked by Wood and Danaher and others, they were kicked under fair with not much pressure, which meant that obviously you could kick it better into their 50, and they really took advantage of that. But they really couldn't dominate. They couldn't take advantage of the clearances they were winning. So I thought to have only scored a couple of goals from clearances. We both scored 2 goals from clearances to half-time was a huge factor. So, and, for me, the thing that was most impressive about that whole game of 2 halves, and I would say that there was the first half, there was a standout player for us in Petracca, and in the second half, or George will talk about the second half, but there was another one, and right through the game, Maxi was the other player. We talked last week about how important it is to have, your A-grade players in the team. Those 3 are the best 3 players in our team they're all 3 A-grade players. We've got other good players. And I thought Petracca was just awesome in that first half, as was Maxi as well, but particularly Petracca, his consistency right through that match. And I feel like if he wasn't playing to the level he was, we would have, we could have gone in at halftime being 5-6 goals down, and then we would have been in big trouble. The fact that we're only 20 points down, I actually, funnily enough, felt more nervous in that game than I did, in the Adelaide game than this one, because we just hadn't got it together yet. We hadn't started attacking. We hadn't started moving the ball, which was what Track's comment about boring movement. We hadn't got going and pushing that game forward. And so I thought, we had a bit in the tank. So I was actually quite confident that we would turn it around in the second half. And, I would argue that we set it up in the first half by being in that game.
George, you want to talk about how we turned it around?
Indeed. I think Binman summed it up beautifully when we review that first half and what the coaches said at half time. We were only 20 points down, effectively 3 goals, and at that time we were being beaten at the contest, and I certainly felt that the defensive structures were not working as they had been in the past. And when I say defensive structures, people focus too much on Lever, May and Petty. The defensive structures start halfway up the ground or even 3/4 of the way up the ground, and the ball was getting into the Brisbane forward line far too easily, and people like Hipwood and Danaher were getting good runs at the ball because it was coming in so easily, and also Bailey as well. This was a game in which it was 1v3, and it is exactly what happens in grand finals. And I hope we've learnt from this game at least how the margins between winning and losing in a grand final are very slim. It comes down to a few players getting the ball, being able to do the right thing at the right time. And in that first half, we had a number of players who weren't going at 100%, and Brisbane took full advantage of it. So our situation wasn't good at halftime, apart from the fact that we're only 20 points down. We had 14 players who only had 2 disposals or less in the second quarter. Oliver only had 8 touches to half-time. Neal-Bullen had 0 in the second quarter and 3 to half-time. Max Gawn had only taken 1 mark to half-time. We were seriously down, and whatever the coaches put into the drinking water at half-time or the message that they sent to them certainly got all the individual players playing at a much higher intensity than they had been in that first half. So that was the first change that would have been affected off the field. I think at halftime they did 5 things that I identified. Firstly, the defensive structures were realigned. In the first half, like I said, things weren't happening at that sort of half forward line for us. And in the second half, we saw players like Jordon, Fritsch, T-Mac, Spargo and Pickett move further up the ground. All of a sudden, Brisbane, when they came out of their defensive structures, couldn't switch. They couldn't move the ball as freely as they had in the first half, and the intercepts started to come. The defence of the May, Lever, Petty type was happening because of the work that was happening up the ground that simply wasn't there in the first half. So moving those players up the ground further put the pressure on the Brisbane backs, and we started to get the intercepts as a result. And Brisbane only scored 3 goals after half-time. So after half-time, those structures were much better in place than what they had been in the first half. Second thing was Gawn took control in the middle, absolutely changed his game around. In the ruck contest, all of a sudden, clean taps were being made to people like Petracca and Oliver. We were getting the ball much more freely in the middle. The other thing that I noticed was that Harmes changed his tagging role on Neal. Previously, in the first half, he played Neal very closely, almost an identical situation to what he was doing with Libba the previous week. But he moved away from him quite considerably. What this meant was that even though Neal got the ball, Harmes could attack him at speed when he did get the ball. And there was one classic example where Neal picked the ball up at the back of the centre square, swung around, but he had to swing around out on an arc, and as a result kicked the ball to the half-forward line where I think it was Petty intercepted the ball. So the pressure that Harmes was able to change on Neal caused him to not have the same effect as what he did in the first half. Also, there was this crossover tag that I spoke about previously where a player wouldn't necessarily stand alongside the person he was tagging. So you'll see Petracca sitting on Zorko sometimes. You'll see Harmes sitting on Zorko, but the actual person that they're opposed to is some distance away. So that'll be interesting to watch whether this continues. Third one, and the commentators picked it up. I think it was I can't remember which one of the commentators picked up. In the first half, we marked and played on only 9% of the time. In the second half, that was up to, in the third quarter certainly, it was up to 38%. We got the ball and we started to move it quickly. Whereas in the first half, it was a lot more of the chip and kick type of play that we were forced into. When we started moving the ball quickly into that forward line, things started to move and things started to open up for us, and goals resulted simply as a result. Number 4 thing was Cozzy put a lot of pressure on Daniel Rich down whenever Brisbane come out of the back line playing through Rich because he's such a good kick of the ball. You will have noticed Cozzy a couple of times got very close to stifling his kick out of after a point. But what it meant was Rich wasn't able to deliver the ball. It was always a kick into the air or into space or something like that. They just didn't get any drive out of their back line that they usually got from Rich, and certainly did in the first half. I think Rich was their number one got the number one disposals in the first half for Brisbane. Third quarter, I think in particular, we've spoken about it, but the players really changed their focus. They really, really ran hard. You might remember again from the commentators that they said we only had 16 interchanges left in the last quarter. I think that was because we'd used them up in the third quarter to keep our guys on the field, playing with the intensity that they had to play. So yeah, it was a big turnaround, a few minor tweaks, but really that re-established the what Goodwin's called in the past the identifiable Melbourne way of playing the game. Once we got those defensive structures right again, it's what we've become used to up to this stage of the opposition simply cannot penetrate our back line in any meaningful way. So yeah, 3 goals after halftime was a credit to the structures that were put in place. So yeah, a game of 2 halves but I think the coaches did a fabulous job at halftime to identify what was needed and put it in place, and then the players to execute it.
One of the most pleasing things I thought in the third quarter was that we were able to get back both of their third quarter goals almost immediately, which is a good thing because it sort of takes the wind out of their sails or any momentum that they might have been trying to gather. B-Man, anything you want to add to that before we move on?
Yeah, just a couple of things. You hear Goody talk about that identifiable brand, and you also hear him talk about trying to get the game. You hear all the coaches talking about this on our terms, and it was just a fantastic game of footy to give an example of what they mean when they're talking about getting the game on their terms. So in the first half, it was clearly on their terms, wasn't it? All the stats were there. They were winning around the ground stoppages. Their forward half was clicking there. So all their strengths that they have were playing, and we couldn't. They were dominating territory. So, they had 72% in forward half after about 7 or 8 minutes. So they were doing what we were doing. They were taking our strength away, which is our rebounding off the half-back flank. But they also took away, by doing that, our other major strength, which is when the game is on our terms, we squeeze teams in our forward half, as we've talked about all season. And we just couldn't do that because we couldn't get territory. And they were marking. The other thing, one of our strengths is our ability to stop the opposition taking marks inside their forward 50. And they had 6 at the end of the first quarter. They had 7 contested marks to our 2, I think, and 6 of them were inside the 50-metre arc. And that just doesn't happen to us. So, the game was on their terms. And in the second half, you saw what happened when your game got on our terms. We took away all of their strengths, and exactly as George said, we ended up squeezing them. They only scored 3 goals, one of which was a pretty soft free kick to Cameron. And the game, when you looked at it, it looked like an identifiable brand for the D's, where they struggled to clear it. And I thought exactly that really good pickup, George, about Rich, because not only that was clearly a strategy, and not only did Cozzy really attack him, which was what my point was, that they weren't really doing that in the first half. And that's where the difference is. That's why those sort of stats can be a bit misleading, because they're a symptom. The real problem was that players weren't intense enough and running at that player like the Rich, and they were allowing them to take those 2-3 steps and delivering them. They've got good kicks. They kick for 40, 50 metres because they've got the height up forward. But so Rich was having to kick long, but often, George, from the deep back pocket, so he wasn't getting up the ground like they really want him to off the half-back flank. So I thought that was super clever. And then I heard on one of the commentators saying that Williams really got into the forward half team as just before they were about to start, just basically trying to rev them up, because that's the other thing we weren't doing. We just didn't have enough, as you pointed out, George, enough forward half pressure. So I thought the interesting thing with the uncontested is I think we deliberately might have tried to go slow in that first half to keep it out of the stoppages. So from after about 5-6 minutes, it was 21-7. At the halfway mark, actually, the first quarter was 21-7 uncontested possessions our way. But from that point on until the end of the second half, they just smashed us in uncontested and contested possessions. So I think part of that was, we came out in the second half much more attacking. And I heard in something interesting during the week, a couple of people talk, I think Uze and someone else, about a rule now that at Melbourne you only have one player going to the contest for a tackle, and then everyone else is on the ring. And that helps with, I think T-Mac mentioned it, and that helps with that link-up play when you get the tic-tac down the ground, because you've got one at the contest and two outside, and there was a clear emphasis on running and getting forward of the ball and winning that contest. And again, probably the most important stat that they talk about is that post-clearance possession that you win if you win that contest then. And we started winning them ahead of the ball, and, you could really see the game looked like it on our terms. So the other thing I just think is our leaders were incredible. I heard them talk about, ask Goody about, well, did you rev them up? And he said no, but I got into my leaders and said, you need to stand up. And that's, we've been talking about it for years at the D's, haven't we? We don't have strong leaders, and I think that's no longer true, and we won because of it.
Let's talk some individual efforts. We'll try and be as brief as possible, but it's hard when you've got sort of a long list of people that deserve some praise. First cab off the rank, Christian Petracca, an absolute bull. Last year had that breakout year, but I think he's taken that game to a whole new level this year. 26 possessions, 16 contested, 9 clearances, 9 tackles, 9 score involvements, 7 inside 50s, and an incredible 724 metres gained. 2 goals, and that one on the run was an absolute beauty, wasn't it, George?
Yeah, love that one, but I also love that. Love the effort of T-Mac when he took out the 2 Brisbane defenders by blocking beautifully for Petracca to run in and score that goal. But yeah, he's what we've been wanting for years and years. The strength that he has is just incredible, and I'm constantly astounded by his ability to kick off one step, 50, 60 metres so easily. His penetration into the forward line with those kicks is what's creating the opportunities up there now. So, and the good thing about Petracca was he was consistent the whole game. He was performing the whole game when others around him, even Oliver, like I said, only had 8 touches to half-time. That's not Oliver, and we'll talk about him shortly as well. But, Petracca was just superb.
And that's exactly what you want from a leader when your team's struggling. The energy was a bit flat. I wonder whether there was a strategy to come in to maintain possession and take the heat off them. They came in physical as I expected they would. He just stood up, and if you look at the watch all the goals clip, he's involved in, I think not the first one, which was the lucky free kick. The next 3, he's involved in those scoring chains, including that magnificent handball that must have gone 20 metres to set up perhaps our second or third goal. And he was a difference in that match, a difference maker. And exactly as you say, George, how long have we been desperate for such a player who says, well, I'm just going to refuse? And, he was massive for that first half. Oliver came good in the second half. But the other thing was he was a huge factor in our scores. And I think, Andy, 12 inside 50s to half-time. Was that right? It was an incredibly low number.
From him or from the team?
No, from the team. Sorry, inside 50s. How many, do you know what it was inside 50s? But he was a big reason why we were in that game, because we were much more likely to score once we got it inside 50 than they were, as it turned out. So, and largely on the back of his work, he was incredible in terms of his ability to get it forward. I like the goal he kicked that he went back and slotted it. He just took it. Leadership, and he thumped that ball from just on outside the 50-metre arc, and he never had any thought about doing anything but do that, and we really needed a goal at that stage.
Clayton Oliver was instrumental in turning the tide of the game in the second half. After half-time, he's had the 18 disposals and 5 clearances. I really love that he's kicking the ball more often, but he's still silky slick with those quick handballs out of congestion. To the point where I think it was Dermy on one of the Saturday or Sunday footy shows was accusing him of throwing it, but you have a look at it and it's clear he gets his hand on all of them. 25 possessions, 14 contested, 8 clearances, 5 tackles, 11 score involvements and 7 inside 50s. Big man, does he chuck the ball or not?
I happened to watch that, and I cannot stand the commentators anymore. It was some of the commentary in this game was appalling. But no, none of those examples. Like, there's often ones that he does throw it, but none of the examples in that game in that clip were throwing. And Dermy seems to have a set against the D's, but it's hard to take him seriously, to be honest. But he was awesome, wasn't he, Oliver, in that second half? Was he being tagged, George, in the first half?
I don't know. I only reviewed the second half from that perspective. I wasn't looking at tags on Oliver, but he was well down from what he was. He certainly moved further up the ground in the second half. He was getting far more drive, and he was heavily involved in a number of our goals. I think the one that he gave to Tom McDonald in the forward pocket, where McDonald was in the ruck and it was hit to Oliver, and Oliver handballed it back, I don't know how, to McDonald to score the goal, was just brilliant. But he was moving much further up the ground than he had in the first half, and he's kicking the ball like Petracca now, deep and long, and creating the options. And for the opposition to have two players of that ilk must be a real nightmare. Not too many teams have that type of player in numbers. They have variance around the middle, but we've got two rippers here. And
if you compare him to both of those players, and let's say Oliver, who was getting numbers similar to Sam Mitchell for Hawthorn, and playing in not a dissimilar role in the sense that a lot of those possessions were out the back of the defensive side of the contest, and 3-4 handballs. Now he gets 30 possessions, and they're super damaging, as we've talked about a number of times. And I thought that goal was brilliant. That was our first goal of the third quarter, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I think you're right, George, in the sense there was a real palpable effort and energy, if that makes sense. When they came out, they looked to be energetic, and that really got us going. And I thought that the sort of it was critical. We got a goal early because it got us up and about, and you could feel the momentum building. And really, after about 4 or 5 minutes, I just felt like they were going to struggle. They seemed to struggle, and that's what ended up being the case, to get the momentum back at all. They could never stop it. And there was another one where Petty handballed into Hunt, and Hunt got running. And I think that once they got up and about, they really fed off it. And he's a real barometer to he was sitting on the bench, wasn't he, the barometer in terms of Oliver's energy, the energy he brings to that team. Track was like it through the whole match, and I feel like Track, if he hadn't have played in that game, we would have potentially been 35, 36 points down at halftime, and you're not coming back from that generally. But Oliver's energy was as important as his possessions, because he just seemed to, every time he went near the ball, he seemed to be absolutely focused on winning it. There was one where he was completely spent, where Kerry reckons he deliberately kicked it on so he could have 30 more seconds, which I sort of dismissed. But then when he went back to try and kick that goal from the boundary line, he looked completely spent. And that's not because he's not fit. That's because he's just worked his absolute backside off in that second half. He was just a star.
I don't think you can accuse anyone in that team of not being fit. I think that's one of the reasons we were able to absolutely dismantle them in the second half and go on with it in the last quarter, because they look like some of their players were giving half-assed efforts. Yeah. Danaher, there was one in particular, he did 3 times in the one thing that he gave half-assed efforts. And also I think when Sparrow kicked his goal, Zorko sort of gave a half-assed effort, didn't even make any effort to sort of try to tackle or spoil or go for a smother or anything. So, yeah, I think they were spent and we were full. We still had another gear to click into. Let's go on to Max Gawn. Each week, in the last few weeks, Max has slowly been getting back to his best. I think he got back there this week. 17 possessions, 11 contested, 31 hit-outs, 9 to advantage, 4 clearances, 6 score involvement. That one Rovers goal early on in the game. I'll add that his ruck contest at the very start of the last quarter, where he got the clearance and the kick to Cozzy into space to set up our first goal of that quarter, was inspirational and everything you want from a captain. Fantastic, George.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, he changed his game from that first half to the second, and that was when you talk about captain's goals, that first one that he gave to Cozzy in that last quarter was a captain's goal. It was just superb. He like I said, he only had that one mark to halftime. He was well down from what he usually is, and I don't think he's back to his best quite yet. No. But he dragged himself across the line to lift the team, and that was just fantastic to watch. And McInerney was spent by the end of the game. He'd given up, like you said, the fitness levels, and Max was able to. As I mentioned before, in that second half, all of a sudden Max's hit-outs were going to real advantage to us. So, we certainly need Max in the side. He lifted that whole team and lifted the ones around him, which is what you want from a leader. He's been an inspired selection as a leader for this team.
And Max knew that when that first contest where he kicked it to Cozzy, he knew that McInerney was not going to get anywhere near him. He just put the afterburners on.
Yeah.
James Harmes. A few weeks ago, I knocked this bloke and labelled him as just a placeholder for Viney. But he's played two of the best weeks of football I've seen from him since the finals in 2018, perhaps even better than that. And we'll talk a bit later about the makeup of our midfield once Viney's fit to return. But Harmes is definitely making a case for himself as someone who wants to feature in the starting lineup of this team. He spent most of his time at stoppages, as you mentioned, on Lachie Neale, who was giving us headaches in the first half. Upon watching the second half, he spent some of the stoppages not just on Neale, but he would go to McCluggage as well sometimes. He mixed it up. I think he was on Zorko one or two times. And it's not just his tagging work, but he's able to find the pill himself, and he's racked up 23 possessions, 11 contested, 6 clearances, and he's been in 6 score involvements. So really contributing to the team. Big man?
He was terrific, wasn't he? I thought that was his best game. He was really, I thought, I don't think he tagged. Certainly wasn't a hard tag.
No.
Not in the way he has previously.
But at the stoppages, he had his art, like he was letting them know he was there a lot of the time.
Yeah, for sure. I thought he was really important. His run-all game was fantastic. He's another player who looks really fit, and he seems to be. Sometimes he's not switched on and makes sort of decision-making errors more than execution, if that makes sense. And but he looked super switched on and didn't make any of those sorts of errors. Like against the Adelaide, I remember thinking or commenting he made a couple of Hollywood hand pass, or there was none of that, was there? He was really focused on his footy. And I thought he used the ball really well as well. He made good decisions how he used it. We were actually in the second quarter, another factor in terms of not getting kicked out of that game. I couldn't believe it. I read a stat during the game that, or perhaps it was afterwards, our first 15 kicks in the second quarter all hit a target. We were 100% efficiency in the first 15 minutes. So, again, that shows a team that's improving. If half of them are turned over, suddenly it's not a 20-point, gap at half time. It's 40 points, isn't it? So, and he was a player that was hitting his targets, as obviously in that stretch everyone was. So, yeah, he was important, and I don't think he's going out of the team.
Tom Sparrow and James Jordon. I won't reel off too many stats for these two, but I really just wanted to congratulate Jason Taylor on finding these two gems in a draft year where we weren't in the pointy end of it. He's had to identify some talents that would, really complement our midfield and be able to slot in at various times during the game. And both of these players are able to do that, just that, not just on the inside, but on the outside as well. Tom and James have had 19 and 20 possessions respectively, and Tom's kicked that goal effectively off one step from 50 metres, which is exactly what you want from your midfielders. We've mentioned how we want to see more of that from Petracca and Oliver, and both Tom this week and Jordon last week were able to sort of hit the scoreboard as well. So that's exactly what you want from your midfielders. George, you want to add anything about these two?
Yeah, both rippers again, and again that's another couple of strings to the bow of these sort of 20-year-old players that we've got who are coming into the side and are just performing. Sparrow's 19 possessions were off, I think it was 57 or 58% game time, which is just incredible. That if he'd played 90% like Petracca or Oliver had played, he would have been 30 possessions, and we'd be thinking even more so of him. James Jordon, again, fantastic. He filled the role on the wing that had been vacated by Langdon. Different way of playing and a different style of playing, but he just seemed to be in everything. And again, he was one of the reasons why that defensive structure suddenly became a lot tighter. He was able to hold down his wing and just stop the opportunities for the Brisbane attacks that are coming out of their back line. Just two superb players that we've now added to the side. And at the start of the season, I doubt that we would have thought that they would be playing regular games on this basis this year. But Sparrow's not going out of the side after that performance.
My boy, Captain Jack, he played great, didn't he? He's a competitor, and he's he really likes the tough stuff as well. And it probably speaks to how much they were out on their feet. He had so much time to pick up that ball when he kicked that goal, but he hit it sweet from outside 50. James Jordan's just a revelation. I had no sense at all what a gem he is, and he just, not only is he a clever footballer, he just makes smart decisions. He's got that rare ability to seemingly have a little bit more time and space than other players. He doesn't look flashy. He doesn't look like he sort of jumps out at you when he plays. I think the Junior McDonald comparison, obviously helped by the number, is a really good one. But he, just like Junior, he's clever in what he does. He plays within his limitations. He hits his handballs. He hits his kicks. And I think he's like one of the top 10 or top 5 tacklers in the AFL, isn't he, Andy? He's ferocious at the footy. Two young players who love tackling and grunt. I was thrilled with both their performances.
The other thing I liked about Sparrow was that chain of handballs that started on the half back line. It came from Hibbert to Lever to A&B to a couple of others in the middle, but there was a Tom Sparrow handball that made A&B's run work, which was he took possession and had to put it out in front, but behind which way he was facing at the time. If he'd missed that handball, it was all over, but he just made it beautifully and gave A&B the chance to kick it into the forward line. A&B didn't do a great job of that, but Tommy Mack cleaned it up nicely to score the goal, which is just magnificent. It's
one of the best goals all season, and it was a fantastic example of what we were talking about last week, of the way they thread the way down the boundary line. If it goes out, no worries, it's on the wing, they get a stoppage and they reset. It doesn't go out, they chain it up down that wing. Pretty low risk, because it's not like it gets turned over in the corridor and then suddenly you're going to give up a goal. And when it comes off, it just looks fantastic. And in that play, I forget who did it, but someone couldn't handball it and just tapped it forward and kept the chain going, kept that run going. So that's just a thrilling goal. And when we get goals like that, it's it's a funny combination of that defensive game that can really squeeze oppositions and sort of take the life out of it, and sort of intersperse with just really attacking things when we get out in front of the contest and run. And the commentators sort of make note of it, but we really look like we were running on top of the ground and they had concrete in their boots.
George, you had mentioned about Jordon taking on that role with Langdon going out, and we were always going to miss the run and drive of Ed Langdon on the wing. So not just with Jordon playing there, how do we cover that? I couldn't. We didn't really replace that type of play that that we get from Ed Langdon. So
I think you can't replace Ed Langdon and the way he plays. So Jordon's a completely different sort of player, but he's obviously got sufficient tank to be able to go out there and play that role. I think we actually played it brilliantly in one sense, in that Langdon roams from back pocket to forward pocket. Jordon doesn't have that sort of at the moment. Obviously, doesn't seem to have that sort of ability. It'd be amazing if he did. But I think what we did was we actually filled the gaps that either went in with Salem and Spargo. So you saw Spargo playing a lot further down the ground than he normally would. You know, he's essentially a forward pocket type player, but he was up on the wing and up on the half back line at times, and Salem was doing the same thing at the other end, helping out. So we were covering Jordon on either side with a little bit with the extra work that Salem and Spargo were putting in. So we didn't miss Langdon in that sense. I thought we'd really struggle to get the ball up the ground, but it was beautifully done. And Jordan's such a great kick of the ball. It's one of Bin Man's favourite items, and you can see why. He just delivers the ball beautifully every time, and then combine it with a couple of other equally good kicks in Salem and Spargo, and there's your Ed Langdon in another form.
I thought they swapped. You're right, that he didn't take the whole wing, but I thought they did end up swapping with Gus playing the offensive wing, because I think they went through Gus, I'm pretty sure, and leaving the defensive side to Jordon. And I think you're right, George, he didn't roam as far back. I think he went back into the back line, but didn't go as much forward. So I'm pretty sure that essentially Gus took Langdon's role and was up and down that wing, playing that role with Jordon getting a chop out on the other side, on the defensive side of it. And he's a clever player who can obviously be given a job. So, that it augurs well, I think, for, going forward in case you need to fill a hole at any stage, that you've got players who can play multiple positions. And I read with interest on Demonland saying someone noted that they'd heard that each player was asked to train in a second role. So had you heard that, George? Or Andrew?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so if that's the case, sort of that flexibility, who knows, maybe Jordon had done some has trained as a winger in the preseason. I forget who made the comment, but the comment was that each player had to learn a secondary position, if you like.
Did Charlie Spargo have to learn ruck?
I think, yes. Well, he's not a bad aerialist, so I wouldn't be totally shocked. He gets up there and he took an absolutely amazing mark.
That was a ripper.
I think it was in the first quarter where he got thumped in the contest. It wasn't really, he didn't jump that high, but it was a short kick from Petty, and if he didn't mark it, it was the ball was going to hit the ground and away they'd go. And but he really launched into it and grabbed it.
Let's talk our defence. I thought in first half we were pretty much beaten defence, primarily because, as we've discussed, the opposition was able to move the ball quickly out of the middle or from stoppages, and we were simply beaten by their forwards in the air. After half-time, we were able to reverse the stoppage numbers, and from then on, whenever Brisbane were able to win the ball off their half-back line, they were just met with our wall, and they sort of had to sort of stop and prop and look to the wings to try and go elsewhere. And we got the likes of don't have to discuss everything they did. May had some great contested overhead marks. Lever doing the stuff Lever does. Petty did a good job on all the players. He ended up sort of, I think you mentioned it, Bin Man, they were sort of changing around who they were on. He was on McStay a couple of times, or Hipwood, and we were able to just pick off their entries, and these guys were ably assisted by Hibberd, Rivers, Salem. Our defence, I love them. Can't say much more about them.
I think George makes a really good point before that. defence isn't just that back six; it's the whole defensive unit. But T-Mac made the point about how much harder the defence worked to halve their contests, and May in particular was a sort of different player in terms of he was much more aggressive going for his marks in that second half, and I'm not sure how many intercept marks he ended up with, but I don't think he had any in the first half. They were able to, again, get it on their terms. But really, as much as anything, that's where, it's important that your mids and your half-backs and even your Max and your other players are putting pressure on, because it's exactly that pressure on that last kick inside 50 that in the first half, a lot of those kicks were under no pressure or limited pressure, I should say. Probably not no pressure. We never really were that low in our pressure. But as soon as we tidied that aspect of the game up, it makes all of the defenders' job a bit easier. But again, May just stood up and, I thought his performance was probably the best of the backmen. I thought Petty was good as well. He's certainly aggressive and he's for a young player. And I think that, again, like I said, about that first half, I just feel a bit that they're it seems to be a bit more fluid now than it was with Tomlinson in, and it seems to be a little less set in stone, their different positions. So the fact that they could stop the highest scoring team in the AFL to only stop them scoring any more than 3 goals in the second half is testament to a complete defensive system that was working. But it would appear that those big fellas back there, all 3 of them, decided to really sort of crunch down. And the other one, as we talked about last week, is the role Hibberd played. I thought Hibberd was fantastic on Cameron, really didn't give him much space. And I'm not sure what happened in the second half, but Bailey had no influence essentially in the second half after dominating the first half. So they got a bit right in that second half in terms of their matchups and how we played.
The ball wasn't coming down there. Simple as that.
It helps.
It wasn't getting past halfway.
No.
Yeah.
Forwards, Fritsch was able to hit the scoreboard early for us, but up until half-time there wasn't much to write home about in regards to our forward line. We were once again hamstrung by the quality of supply going into our forward line, and also our inability to convert from set shots. In the last quarter, when Fritsch was having a shot from outside 50, that said we'd only converted 4 of 11 shots on the night, and Fritsch then chose to pass short to T-Mac, which went over his head, just highlighting our poor disposal, I thought, into our 50-metre arc at times. And then later in the game, Weed missed an absolute gettable goal, further highlighting the poor set shot accuracy for the night, which is why I thought the scoreline in the end flattered them, because we had our opportunities, particularly from set shots. So luckily for us, our shots from in play were much more accurate. Tommy Mack was able to kick 3 after half-time. Cozzy showed off his Cozzy stuff, kicking 3 as well, which could have easily have been 5 or 6, and it's just a matter of time before he actually does have a game where he kicked 5 or 6 and just breaks the team apart. George?
Yeah, I think the common factor with Fritsch, T-Mac and Cozzy was work rate. It was the whole game, well, certainly in the second half, they really, really put in. Cozzy, and we've talked about his pressure on Rich in the back line, but he's just constantly around players threatening to do something at any one point. T-Mac was just fantastic. His strength in the forward line, even when he was doing ruck duties, or like I said, I mentioned him in that Petracca goal. If he hadn't laid that bump on the Brisbane players, Petracca would have been under extreme pressure to kick that. Fritsch was again working much harder than I've ever seen Fritsch work before.
Up the field as well, I thought. He went up the field a few times as well to get the ball. So
yeah, there was. I think it was in the third quarter, or maybe the last. I can't remember. Where Brisbane had the ball inside, 20 or 30 metres. Player was out on his own. It was absolute guaranteed goal, and Fritsch shut him down. So he's run the length of the ground to create that defensive pressure. There was someone else involved in it as well, but that was a guaranteed goal. So when you've got Fritsch working as hard as he was, and T-Mac working as hard as he is, and Cozzy works hard all the time, the old adage about the luckier you get, the harder you work, the luckier you get, and these 3 certainly are getting the results as a result of it.
And not just them, A&B stepped it up in the second half. I thought Spargo was good right through the match, but Nibbler was pretty quiet. And, I thought, it was quite interesting, that sort of notion of Williams firing up that the front half, the forwards, because it probably, the defensive unit gets some stick if you give up scores. But really, as we've talked about, our game plan is all about trapping it inside our forward half if we can. And then, if they dump kick it out, kicking it straight back in. And that means pressure from our forward. And so, that sort of pressure that you talked about, T-Mac doing, just little things, that's the difference. And they were a huge factor in lifting that pressure rate, because the game's never going to get how we want to look at if they're not doing that. I thought Cozzy was fantastic. And I think the way he played on Rich was really important for that, because, again, it just meant that they were struggling to get it past that 70-metre wall that we were setting up, which is what we just do when we're on, to squeeze them up. But, he had to get across, which he wasn't doing in the first half. So it just sort of reinforces the game plan is hard to play because, it requires so much gut running. And I think that really has to be factored into our inaccurate kicking in the second half of games, because as fit as we are, and we're evidently fitter than most teams, it would appear, they're gassed. Like the goal that Track missed at the end, where 9 times out of 10 in the first quarter he'd get that, no problems, but he was exhausted running into pretty much an open goal. But I totally agree on Fritsch. I thought that was his best game from a pressure perspective. And I remember the one you're talking about, George, he did run, sprinted and made a good tackle, and they were out. And I think it was the third quarter. It was sort of at a time where we'd push him, but if they got a couple of goals back, then they could have got their momentum. And you made the good point, Andy, is that I thought it was really important us getting goals after they got goals. It just wouldn't. They just couldn't get any momentum going in that second half of footy, and that's the sort of thing that Fritsch did, that you've got to bring every week to make sure that they can't get those 2 or 3 goals in a row.
I guess we've got to talk about Sam Weideman again. I'll preface all of these comments acknowledging that he was playing on perhaps the second best defender in the league. And as I've already mentioned, some of the delivery wasn't great. But having said that, I was very disappointed with Sam's game again on the weekend. Once again, he had a solitary touch until midway through the third term, I believe. A couple of times he was able to get both mitts on the ball but was unable to mark. His 2 genuine shots on goal showed that he can do what we want and expect from him after 6 years in the system. The first was from a nice lead from a T-Mac kick, and the second was in the last quarter from a great contested overhead grab. I want to see more of that, but unfortunately we're not. And to make matters worse, he missed both shots, and the second one, he missed everything. Both were very gettable kicks for a key position forward. And if you're not getting big numbers in terms of stats, you have to take your opportunities from every one that you get. And we're just not getting that with Sam. And I see other key forwards from other teams that were drafted either just before or after him that don't seem to have the same issues. And it makes me wonder what the future holds for Sam. He's clearly too good for VFL level, but he's not cutting the mustard for me at AFL level. I'm not even convinced he just needs time to settle. I guess there are a few questions I'll throw to you guys. I'm going to play some audio in a second, and so get your thoughts together. And the questions I sort of want to ask is, do we persist with Sam in the ones given the uncertainty over VFL games at the moment due to COVID, or do we get Ben Brown in given the same conundrum with not having VFL games to give him some match practice? And what of Sam's future? Both T-Mac and Brown are both 29 later in the year. Sam turns 24 in a few weeks. We need to consider the future of our key position stocks. Like, is Sam part of that future? We don't have any key forwards waiting in the twos, so we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater yet. I'll play this audio. It was from Matthew Lloyd and Damien Barrett's one of their programs online on the AFL website, just talking about Sam Weideman and a bit of Ben Brown.
What do you make of the forward line dynamic, Lord? We know that they went into the season with the plan of having both Sam Weideman and Ben Brown as the main man. Now, in round 9 there, we've highlighted since Weideman's return, Brown was in the team, and you can see what happened with the number of disposals Weideman had. The 3 matches since for Weideman have been without Brown. Do they lock it in with Weideman now without Brown? Do they give Brown another go?
I reckon they would have felt that he blends in with their forward line better than Ben Brown does, but when you're putting up numbers like that, 1 goal, 2 goals, 0 goals, you're getting your hands to a lot of balls and dropping them. I just wonder whether they give Ben Brown a month, give Weideman 1 more chance, and then if it's not working, okay, let's give Ben Brown 4 or 5 weeks to see what he can do, and by round 17, they go, okay, let's settle on our best side. And I'm still not sure whether it's Brown or it's Weideman.
Make him apply for the job, basically.
Yeah, make him apply, because I don't think Weideman has taken his chance at the moment.
Do you abandon all possibilities of them playing again together?
I think so, yeah. I think Fritsch and McDonald pick themselves, and then Gawn and Jackson also go forward. So I don't think there's room for the both of them. Yeah.
So he was referencing Sam Weideman's stats. So he played the Blues, Crows, Bulldogs, Lions, 0, 1, 2 and 0. Goals, disposals, 13, 9, 6 and 8. Marks, 5, 3, 5, 3. And inside 50 targets, 11, 3, 5, 6. George, what do we do with Sam?
I think Matthew Lloyd just summed it up pretty well. He's had his chance. He's not producing. He's kicked 3 goals for the season, even though it's only off 4 games. But he's never kicked 20 goals in the season, whereas Brown at least has multiple seasons where he finished second in the Coleman. There's absolutely no chance the way he's playing that Sam Weideman will be up in the top 3 or 4 or 5 or even 10 of the Coleman. The way he's performing. The most he's ever kicked in a game is 3. He had 1 possession in the first half. It was a repeat of the previous week. His second possession was 20 minutes into the third quarter. At the end of the day, he's a full forward. It doesn't matter whether he's on Harris Andrews or not. That's what he's got to expect every single week, a quality full back. You just can't... If you're not performing against quality fullbacks, which you get at the AFL level, then do you really have a role as a full forward? I don't think so at the moment. I've always been critical about his second efforts. You see how hard Tommy Mack's working up the ground back around, how strong Tommy Mack's marks are. Weideman had plenty of chances to mark the ball overhead in this game. This is where these were marks where he got both hands on the ball, and people say, oh, he brought the ball to ground. No, he didn't bring the ball to ground. He dropped the mark. That's not good enough as a full forward. You've got to produce goals as a full forward, and Ben Brown, for me, is a better option. But I think Lloyd's got it when he says you might get 1 more game, and then you've got to try Brown in any case to see what's going to work for you, because when you get to round 17, you need to have your team set.
Big man, or even George, you want to take a what's the future hold? We can't be without a key forward in a couple of years.
To a certain extent, I don't care if we've got a premiership this year. We are absolutely in the premiership window right now. If it takes 3 years for Sam Weideman to come good, that's no good to us this year. We've got to produce the results this year. We're effectively, a game clear on top, 2 games clear of third, and about 5 games clear in the 8. This is the year that we are challenging for the premiership. We need the best full forward we can possibly put on the ground, and what happens to Sam at the end of the year is up to him.
They had a very similar conversation to that, to the one that you just played on First Crack on Sunday night. And Montagna basically said a similar thing, put those stats up, and he talked about, 46 games, 48 games, not quite a goal a game, or maybe just on a goal a game. I think that the challenge for them is structurally, I think Sam is probably a better fit than Brown. I think he can still make it. Sam Weideman, I think he'll want to stay at the club, and that answers that question. You keep him at the club and you allow him to build. Whether players do get to their destination at different ways. There is still that scope in him. The time is ticking forward. The thing for Brown is can you really afford him to sort of be not playing VFL and not getting match practice? I don't think they're either of them a hugely great fit. Brown is sort of, I just wonder whether they think Sam Weideman's better structurally. I have the same knock on him, obviously, as George does in terms of his second efforts. But I actually thought his sort of pressure was better in this game. He looked a bit more switched on. I've always thought this about him right through his career. I know it sort of gets chucked around easily as sort of a confidence player, but I just feel like he needs a sort of good run at it. And, he needs the confidence of the coaching staff. And so it's been really unfortunate for him that Brown's come in and T-Mac has turned into an all-Australian forward because, either one of those things don't happen. And he's got a guaranteed game. And his best football last year was when, it was just him and Jackson and his position was locked in and, he didn't have to worry about that from week to week. I feel like he's gone a bit backwards since he missed that goal against, I can't recall who it was against, where he missed a goal after the siren or just before the
Adelaide.
siren. Against Adelaide, was it? Where he sort of his confidence has been a bit shaken since then. So, I think he can sort of, lots of players end up making it that you think aren't going to. He's got the tools, he's got the talent. I think the things like the second efforts intensity you can get there. We win a flag this year with Brown in. He wants to be involved. I don't think there's any risk in losing him. He wants to be at a footy club that's successful. He's seen, how old did you say Tom McDonald is?
Both, yeah, they'll be
29. So, Tom McDonald really was on the cusp of getting dropped and potentially traded back in 2017 before they threw him forward. Tom McDonald's Sam Weideman's got evidence in front of him of the opportunity that you've got if you keep working at your craft. And so I'm definitely not thinking he's not going to make it. I'd have Brown in. I've said that the last few weeks. My concern is, to be honest, if they don't pick him this week, Brown this week, and, what happens if we win by 7 or 8 goals and he kicks 4 or 5? It creates a catch-22 for the club because you're not going to drop him, especially our player is a confidence player. And then what happens to Brown? So I think we've got time. So I would be looking at resting players now. We've got the wins in the bank. Now's the time to start thinking of resting players. I wouldn't. Those two players probably can't play together, but I wouldn't be adverse to saying resting even Max Gawn this week. I know they're not going to do it, but, or a Jackson. And if they think, maybe it's around 16, 17 that they bring Brown in. But if Brown's going to be in the finals team, you want him playing in the last 4 or 5 for 6 games of the season. So maybe Week gets another 2-3 weeks and Brown gets cherry ripe and they look to make that switch a bit later.
Let's move on. Charlie Spargo. I thought this was a good opportunity to give Charlie a bit of credit for his season today, particularly on the back of his game on Friday night. For the sake of brevity, we can't highlight every player each week, but we sometimes do. But that doesn't mean that some of the work that some of these role players in the team, that they're not going unnoticed or they're not appreciated by us here. Spargs has had 7 score involvements and 2 goal assists from his 14 disposals. He rarely wastes a kick. He's just a different type of small forward than a Cozzy Pickett, but just as important. Very smart football brain. Seems to work further up the ground too this week, as we mentioned, and as you said, Big Man, love that mark that he took near their 50-metre arc. I just wanted to give Charlie that credit because he's been good. Never wastes the ball.
A natural footballer, isn't he? And I'm right in thinking he was recruited by Taylor as well, wasn't he?
Yes,
he's only been there 4 years.
Yeah. And Taylor's obviously he's got a type that he likes, and the thing that he clearly puts as a priority is smart footy IQ, natural football talent, and he fits that completely to a T. James Jordon, Captain Jack as well, even someone like Rivers, who's probably getting a lot more kudos, but again, smart footballers who know they're not athletes first, footballers second, and the knock on some of the criticism Spargo got in 2019 and even into 2020, he's too short, too slow, he's never going to make it. He really copped a pasting on Demonland, and it just shows that you build over 4 or 5 years, don't you? You don't build in 1 or 2 years. And to think back, he was so important, Spargo, in the finals in 2018, and found it hard after that to get a regular gig. He's the best 22 lock this year, and I thought that was his best game for the season in terms of from beginning of the game to the end of the game. He was consistent right across all 4 quarters, and him and Nibbler both played very similar role. And I'd also give a shout out to Nibbler. I thought he was terrific in the second half.
We're just about to do that, and my notes here was I also wanted to give a quick props to Alex Neal-Bullen, highlight his work ethic and endurance in one particular play. It was the chain that we talked about, that chain of handballs, probably about 11 handballs that started on the Lions 50-metre line and resulted in T-Mac's whirlwind, turn and snap for goal. I just love that whole piece of play, and you can view it on the homepage of Demonland as our video of the week. Nibbler is right there when the chain sort of began, just after, it started with Clary, who got it to Lever, who sort of missed it, went to Petty, back to Lever, and then Nibbler was one of those first players after that got it. He then ran alongside the procession when sort of Hibberd gave it off to Jordon. He kept running aside Jordon and peeled off, got it from Jordon about the half-forward line, and then kicked it to T-Mac, who ultimately kicked the goal. But you just watch his running. It is just absolutely superb, and I just wanted to give him props because we often... I think we've been critical of him in the past because of, we always knew he had that endurance and all that, but he wasn't getting sort of high possessions, and he still doesn't, but he's using the ball a lot better. And I just thought he's got to get some credit this week because he's doing a lot more with the ball now.
He's using the ball a lot better. Sorry, George. But the thing that I was talking about last year with him a lot was that running he did. And, it's easy to discount that as, you've got to do more than just run in a game of footy. And, he only gets 8-9 possessions a match. And what does that mean? He is the template for what 21 other players need to do in that footy team, is to gut run till they've got nothing left in the tank, every single one of them. And that's been the difference this year is you've got 22 players expending the sort of energy that Nibbler has for the last, basically through his career, but particularly last year and the year before. That's why he's now in the leadership group this year, because of his effort. And that's what you need for a premiership winning team. You need your 4 stars, your 5 stars, your 6 stars. You're not winning flags without those guns, but you're also not winning flags without having a full list of players who are prepared to run till they, can't run any further. And Nibbler is a perfect example of, where effort can trump talent to an extent. But you're right, Andy, he's really improved his decision-making and his kicking skills this year. So, that he's not turning it over as often, and he's making some damaging inside 50s, and he's kicking his goals as well.
Incredibly, in this game, that was a complete turnaround. He had 0 possessions in the second quarter. I actually went and looked at the replay of the second quarter to see whether he was on the ground. He was, but 0 possessions. And then after half-time, he completely changed it around. So the other thing that he's completely changed in this game in particular was he had 6 tackles. Now, normally he rarely tackles. He runs and corrals, but this game he tackled. So again, it's a change in the way and the change in the attitude and the change in the pressure that you're putting on players. I was thinking with his corralling tactics that other coaches would be picking up on this if it continued as in the sense of don't worry about Nibbler, he's not going to tackle you. Well, in this game, he's turned that completely around and he's bringing players to ground, which will just add another bow to his game, and certainly did in this game.
It's sort of it's a bit of a cause and effect. It's a bit like they were saying with stats are symptoms, not causes. So he got, basically had a super quiet first half. We struggled. Is that because so many players had a poor first half? That's partly the case. But when the game's not played on our terms and is played on the way they like to play it, which is get it forward, lots of stoppages, it negates his strength, which is that gut running across to cover the outlet kick to keep it trapped in our forward line. So suddenly his strength is taken away when the whole team can't get the game on our terms. He's not going to be doing defensive marking balls against a Danaher or a Hipwood, but that's what, they had 70% of the game in their half in that first half, in the first half of the game. So it's taken away from him, and it sort of negates his ability. And similarly, we just weren't bouncing off half-back flanks. So they outscored us from the half-back line. I think they got triple the amount of scores we did from the half-back line. That's one of our one-wood is scoring off that half-back line, getting the Rivers involved and Hunt. But when the game's not looking like we want it, well, Hunt suddenly gets no run off the half-back flank because we're not getting intercept. We're not winning either intercept marks or the ball hits the ground and we're not winning them when it's on their terms. So it's a bit of the symptom or cause. And so once we do get it back on our terms, the nibblers, and of course they contribute to that, but then their stats start going north again.
A couple of interesting things. I just had a mate message me with some stats from Champion Data just about our game. Good sign for Melbourne. Lever had minimal impact. His lowest rated game of the season, second fewest intercept for the season, second fewest intercept marks for the season. Good signs for Melbourne. Christian Salem's last 2 weeks, minimal impact. Second lowest rated player on the ground versus Brisbane. Third lowest rated player on the ground versus Western Bulldogs. Ball use the last 2 weeks hasn't been penetrating. Impact through ball use is down 140% the last 2 weeks. So I guess they're saying we've been able to beat these two teams without, this week, Lever at his best and Christian Salem. Then he's also said Petracca's comments about boring footy. First half, just 42 handballs, the team. Gained just 45 metres by handball. Second half had 60 handballs, gained 292 metres by handball. And then the final thing is D's take a while to get going. Goodwin continually mentions they have faith they will eventually get the game on their terms. The D's have lost 6 first quarters for the season, and we've won 6. Have lost 11 quarters in the first half. We've won 13. We've only lost 6 quarters in the second halves, and we've won 17 quarters. So there's just some Champion Data stats.
That point about Lever and Salem is an interesting one, and it goes to my comment about the problem for oppositions, because our strength is those two players from our half-back line. We score a lot from the half-back line. They would have loved it the way it looked for them at halftime, the Lions, because I think we'd only scored 13 points from the back half, and we average, I think 30 points a half, so something like that. So they put a bit of time into making sure that they weren't dump kicking to Lever. That's partly why they were sort of moving it so slowly. They also put time into Salem to cut out his influence, because he's similarly important as Rich is for them. But that's the problem. You're sure they can negate those strengths, but as I said before, it's much less impactful than us taking away their scores from stoppages. So despite all of their dominance, they'd only scored 15 points to our 12 from stoppages, a third of what they'd normally average in a season. So Goody would have been thrilled with that. And over the course of a match, that looks better for us. Lever didn't end up having a fantastic match. It just sort of, that's taking away defensive strength. is a sort of a bit of a nil-sum game in the end. So, he was quiet. So was Salem, and I suspect Salem might be injured. But.
Goody mentioned after the game something about Salem, that he's got a few niggles, which obviously is a holdover from that game that he missed where we played Adelaide. And I'll also say that Salem currently holds the longest winning streak, and I can't remember what it was. I read it today, but it's from round 17 last year. So how many games?
Because he didn't play in the loss.
Yeah, because he didn't play. So I think he's 13 games on the trot. We've got a caller on the line, Terence, I believe. Terence, how are you going?
I'm doing well, thank you, Andy. Thanks for taking the call, I appreciate it. There are a couple of things that I just wanted to bring up, and I don't want to go over what you guys have already done. By the way, it's been excellent so far. But just on Fritz, I know I had been a bit of if not critic, a bit concerned, and Binman had talked about that over the last few weeks. I missed last Monday, Andy. I was thinking it was Tuesday that this would be on, and I just wanted to pick up the previous week. Fritz had been on, I think, 3AW, I had heard, and he was talking about the fact that his first priority is defence, which, I admit I kind of laughed at, thinking, well, that hasn't been what you've been doing over the last few weeks. So last week when we played the Bulldogs, I did notice, just as he did this week, he only had one tackle last week, and he did get up the ground to the halfback flank and punched a ball out of bounds last week, similarly to what he did this week. And the other thing that I noticed, just to applaud him, I think, the other thing I noticed was, even though he's a forward and we expect him to go for his opportunities in the forward line, there are a couple of times this week that potentially he wasn't going to be able to mark, but he made sure that he got into the contest to just in the forward line to just make sure that the back six from the Lions weren't able to take a mark and get it out of their defence. So I think it's really interesting that he's been told that his first priority is defence, and even if we're not seeing it in quite the same way that we do with some of the others like Cozzy and Nibbler and so on, that it is encouraging to see that. So I don't know whether anyone else heard that interview or not, but as I say, I just wanted to pick up on that. And then the other question I have is in relation to finances, and I realise we don't have that, but I got an email earlier today from Gary Pert, as all of the membership did, talking about the games that are being played in Giant Stadium and then in Sydney, and I just wondered whether we have any real concerns at having lost the money from the Northern Territory game, having lost the potential gate from the MCG, whether we feel as though this is going to put us in some kind of risk, or as I heard someone saying a few days ago, if we get deep into finals, then that should give us an opportunity to recover some of those finances. I wondered if you guys had any thoughts on that.
Well, I guess. So what we lost the 800,000 for the Northern Territory. Hopefully, they're going to replace that game. We don't know. It all depends on what happens on the ground here in terms of COVID. If we can replace it, perhaps with the GWS game, then that's all good. So we lose. They estimate about $1 million for the Collingwood game. Does anyone know what the deal is with the SGG? We made a deal with Sydney, not Sydney Swans, but Sydney, the city, to have the game there, but surely that involved us potentially recouping some of the losses. George, is there, you know anything?
You'd have to think that there would be some recoupment of losses. The fact that this week's going to be played at the SCG instead of out of Giant Stadium, I think we'll get a not unreasonable crowd, particularly with Collingwood there as well. There were, in Pert's letter, I think he said there were 3,500 people at Demon supporters at the Swan game. I think there'll be more this week, and certainly Collingwood supporters as well. So there'll be some come back. You get the money from the advertising on the side of the ground, it being our home game, so there's a little bit comes back. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, the club's not in as good a position as what it would have otherwise been. But that's the same for clubs like Richmond and Essendon play the Dreamtime game in Western Australia. Sydney, St Kilda was meant to play a game up in Cairns that may not go ahead from the sounds of things, so they're in a similar sort of situation. Unfortunately, COVID's making things very difficult for us, but we did mention last week that we've taken on a lot of new sponsors and extended the sponsorships that the club's seeking. So we're getting television coverage and we're getting ground signage for these games, which are our home games. So there's going to be some comeback for that. What's interesting, Terence, is what you just said. Our best defender is obviously our leading goal kicker this year.
Well, I wasn't pumping him up quite that much, but I just, because I've been a bit critical, George, I just wanted to make sure that I corrected the record. That's all, given his performance over the last couple of weeks. Guys, I know you're going to talk about it, and perhaps I'll let it go at this stage, but I acknowledge it's not the MFC SS, but I am a little bit worried about the Collingwood game. They played well weekend. So I'll leave it to you to get to that in time, Andy, but I appreciate being able to call in and just share some thoughts, so thank you.
Bin Man, did you want to say something to Terence?
Just on the fridge. So I think that's since you bagged out his defensive work out, he's come good, Terence, in that area, at least the last 2 weeks. So perhaps he got wind of it. He wasn't so great the next week, actually, though. But he worked super hard in this game, as you said. Not just his tackling and pressure was better, but he really gut run a few times up the ground, as George noted earlier. He laid an important tackle. One of the goals he got was on the back of a run that came off the halfback flank, and he took one basically out of Jordon's hands. But other teams obviously rate him super important and consider him to be a really important sort of cog in our machine, because they ran Starcevic on him. And Starcevic has gone to often their best mid-sized forward. The Lions run him on, opposition's best mid-side forwards. And I think you make a good point, Terence, about his role in terms of getting up into aerial contests and bring the ball to ground, because bring the ball to ground is critical to being able to create forward half pressure, because if the opposition market, I don't know how many marks Andrews got, but I feel like he didn't have more than a handful of intercept marks, and you just got to make sure that the opposition backs aren't marking it, because it kills you every time. So I think he's a really important part of the way we set up our forward line. And as I say, I think that the fact that Rampy went to him against the Swans and Starcevic has now gone to him, so other teams obviously know how important he is to the team.
Very good. So one last one on Weideman. I did say last one before, Andy, but on Weideman, I don't want to go back what you guys have already talked about, but this might sound a little bit strange to you, but because I've lived overseas for so many years, I've only really got back into being able to watch games since 2017. So I don't have much history from when I left in 88, okay? The reason I give you that background is because a really good family friend of mine, Gary Marchant, you may have heard of, or Gary Tarax Marchant, he was saying to me just in one-on-one conversations that, what's his name, that guy at Geelong,
Hawkins.
The full forward there, Hawkins. He was saying, Terence, Hawkins was just a horrible player, and Gary has membership at Geelong as well through his father. He said, I watched this guy and just terrible, but he came good, later on, and, of course, he's one of the best in the competition. I wonder if we can see whether you guys observe that with Hawkins, and whether we might see some kind of prospect with Weideman in that context.
Hawkins kicked 9 goals in his first game against Melbourne.
Yeah, that's good. Everyone does.
But I understood that he played really poorly and he would miss and, he wouldn't tackle and things like that. But I never saw any of that. I mean, because I was overseas and just didn't have access. So
I think that's a reasonable comparison. The challenge for Weeds is a bit what George says is his second efforts. And I think he might really get bigger and stronger, but he still seems to get pushed off the ball a bit too easily for mine. And that was never a knock on Hawkins. His follow-up and his pressure was a bit of a knock. I think that's a reasonable comparison. But, I think that's what I mean. He's still got plenty of time to fulfill his potential. And so keep him on the list to make sure he does that. But if he's going to sort of reach Hawkins, well, he won't reach Hawkins' ability, I wouldn't have thought, but if he does, fantastic. But he needs to get stronger through the core and not get pushed out of contest if he's going to be the sort of player Hawkins has become.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Okay, terrific session.
Thanks, Terence.
Thanks. Oh, Terence, before you go,
Yeah.
what are you studying?
Yes.
Sorry, say it
What are
again.
you
What am I?
studying? You mentioned in the chat room
I'm studying. Yeah, I'm studying medieval Celtic history. I'm doing that in Ireland when I'm allowed to travel. Otherwise, I'm doing it online. So, with Latin and things like that. So, a little bit different from watching the football, but the football is a terrific break for me. So.
Well, they do say football's like war, isn't it? Medieval war. There might be some tactics you could bring to the table.
Well, I do promise when I go back, hopefully classes will resume on campus from September, because our academic year is from September through until May. So I am lining up with a couple of other students that I know to go look at some of the Gaelic games, because I'm really keen not only to see what some men might be looking like, but also what some of the younger women might be looking like from a football point of view. That'd be terrific to get some more. So that's my commitment.
Come on, Terence. September. Why are you going out looking at that? There's something else you should be doing in September.
Yeah, cricket to come home.
Well, I should argue. Well, I should say that it's the latter part of September. Yeah, I think Bin Man, you asked me, am I, going to be able to make it? I'm not sure that I will. My wife has health problems that will probably stop me from doing that. But I'll certainly look forward to watching it on the big screen anyway. Anyway, I got to let you guys go and get back to it. So thanks for the time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Terence.
Thanks, Terence. All right, that was Terence. He's been a long time caller now to the show the last few weeks. So, Bin Man, you better watch out. Could be gunning for you, Joe.
Has he? Have we lost after Terence has called?
Well, he's called a few times.
Before the Adelaide game?
I don't know, but he's called a few times and we've won, so I like those odds. All right, let's talk changes for the Collingwood game. Obviously, Langdon's a lock to providing he's recovered from his concussion, which it's been past the 12 days, so I'm sure he has. He's coming back in. Who's going out? George?
I think Langdon would be almost certain to come back in, given that we've got 9 or 10 days between this game and 7 from the previous. I think it'll be an easy one back in. If Meltram doesn't go out this week, I give up. 5 possessions in a game that we utterly controlled simply wasn't enough, and he was just trotting around the ground doing very little for the vast majority of it.
Did he have a role?
Sorry?
Did he have a role on the...
No, he only played 57% again of game time. He was playing in all sorts of positions. He was in the midfield sometime, half-back flank another time, but he was just going at half pace every time. He was only involved 5 times in the game, but going at half pace yet again, no influence whatsoever on any of the things that you expect him to be doing. So Langdon comes in, Meltram is an easy out.
There was a bit of talk on Deanland. I think AF noted that he was on McCluggage, or sort of trying to running off McCluggage a bit and sort of trying to stifle him.
He was running off him.
Well, running off, but we're sort of keeping him. It was sort of like a soft tag, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But then Dazzler responded to that comment that Goodwin was asked about did he have a role, and he said no, but I'm not sure what.
Yeah, I think it's
impossible to tell on the television unless it's a hard tag. And again, his pressure wasn't what it needed to be, I didn't think, and but possibly he's playing a role. I mean, one thing I'd say about Melksham and Weideman is, you've got to give full credit to the coaching staff for their selection so far. And, whilst it might seem a bit mystifying, obviously they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I think there'll be the one change this week. I think it'll be, as you said, George, I think it'll be Langdon in, Melksham out. It has to be. I mean, who else, if Melksham's not out, who else could it be?
Well,
You can't take Sparrow out.
I suspect that they'll look to rest some players this week because I think isn't Lever's partner just about to have a child?
I'm not sure.
I think his partner's due, and I think he probably looks a bit tired. I wouldn't be surprised if they rest him. I reckon Salem, if he's carrying something, now's the perfect time to rest a player. I wouldn't even be averse to resting Langdon, given it the sort of kilometres he runs. Why not give him another week? He probably won't want to. I don't even think about Maxi. I mean, obviously they won't want to make more than 2 or 3, but I won't be surprised if Salem gets a chop out and someone like a Lever. And, I would even be tempted. They won't for this game, I guess. They won't. Maxi's not going to step down. But I think that they'll probably make 2 or 3 fitness-related changes perhaps and bring in some of those younger players. Maybe a Bowie gets his go or a Bowie gets his go. Oh no, there's going to be another one for me. And Bedford, Chandler, those sorts of players who you've got to give a go at some stage in case you need them. Come finals time, you've got to have some of those players with some senior time. And now we've got ourselves in a position where we can now take advantage of that. So 11-1. This is a huge opportunity for us to make sure our team is as fit as possible. And if Salem's carrying anything at all, and he looks like he's not, he himself in the last couple of games he's played, why wouldn't you rest him?
I understand the Salem, but are you getting a bit too arrogant and not taking Collingwood seriously? It's a danger. I agree with Terence. I'm worried about this game.
Well, there's the only way we lose this game if we don't. It's the same against Adelaide. If we don't bring the pressure they bring. Can Collingwood bring the pressure Adelaide bring? I don't think so. So we would have to be completely off the boil to lose this match. There is an argument to say if you've got a few players who are struggling and looking forward to the chop out of the bye, and you've got players like a Chandler and a Bedford who are even Oscar Baker who are just rip-roaring and desperate to get their crack at senior footy, there's an argument that they might bring an energy that players who are starting to sort of flag mid-season, they've got no fuel left in the tank. So, it might actually help our energy. So I think that you've got to be fit. That's going to be the biggest factor will be if we can stay fit. And a strategy to do that is to give players a chop out now. Now's the time to do it and to get your best 22 from round 16 into the end of the season. You got to give some players some time out of the game if you can.
Well, AMAC in the chat room makes a good point. We've got 10 days rest before the Queen's birthday game. 10 from the last game. Then we've got the bye after that, and he says they'll get a bit of rest after that. So,
it's exactly right. That if we are going to, this is the opportunity. If we do need to rest a couple, then you can do that as well because of that long break. And Salem probably is a perfect candidate for that at the moment. And the other thing, I'm not worried about the Collingwood. I watched Collingwood play Geelong, was it 2 weeks ago, where they didn't score a goal in the first half. It was just a horrible game.
Did you watch them this week?
Sorry?
I didn't see any of the game this week.
No, I watched a bit of it, and they were a lot more attacking. They went up, they used the corridor a lot more than they have, and the way Melbourne are playing footy these days is to we're so we get the ball forward at any given opportunity, and that was the knock on Collingwood that the commentators were making. In the post-game analysis, is they were just looking to go sideways all the time. In this game against Crows, they were much more forward momentum, and they used the corridor and they took it on. And so, I think they were 4 or 5 goals up by the end of the first quarter. So I expect that they might do something similar. And all power to them if they do, because we'll bounce it back. But of course, I think any game of AFL footy's, potential loss if you don't bring your full pressure. And our system, as I was saying, relies so much on their defensive running and spread. That stuff that you don't see on the television. You don't really know if your Jordon's running down a wing because the ball's not on that wing, so you can't even see all the running. But if they don't do that level of running, everyone then any team will pick us apart if they're on. I can't see Collingwood doing it to us, and I think we showed in this match we were down in that first half. That was the issue, is that we weren't doing that defensive running like a good footy team does. We balanced up at half time. We fixed what we needed to fix, and the effort was the number one thing. We started winning the contests, so I can't see Collingwood being able to put enough game time together where they'll, stretch us too hard. But of course, not taking them. I think resting some players, it is an indication of you're not taking the opposition seriously. But you've got to give some players a chop out if they need it.
Do you think with Grundy being out, you said they won't do it to Max, but maybe with Grundy out, that's the week to do it?
Yeah, and Adams.
Yep.
And Adams. Look, there's a serious question about, this is, you'd hate to think about it. Gawn is such a critical player to the Melbourne Footy Club. It's hard to even imagine us being a sort of premiership contender without him. It's hard to think about that option. But does Dore they do come in and spend some time? You need a ruckman, and he's the ruckman, isn't he? He's going to come in. I guess Jackson will take number one ruck in that scenario if Gordy's not playing. But he's not a player who likes to rest, as we found out last year. So I doubt he's going to put his hand up to take a rest.
Is there any other things tactical about this game you want to talk about, or we move on?
Well, other than the fact that it'll be interesting to see how they play, they've decided to avoid the blowout. And I wonder whether a factor was in this game that they saw their opportunity against the Crows to win a game. If they chip it around their back half, what Geelong did in that game, they just allowed them to chip it. They just let them go. Melbourne will press right up on them and force a turnover. So if they do play in that style of just chipping around the back line, which they'll do a fair bit of, there's a fair chance they won't get it in. It'll be like one of those Little League games. They just won't get it down the end. It'll be stuck up our end for the whole match. And if they do try to cross and do all of that sort of stuff, then we'll chop that off too. This is sort of a game we could really throttle Collingwood if we're on and they're not, and we press right up on them. So, I think that will be the interesting thing. I think I'm not sure who's rucking now for them with Grundy out. George, do you know who's?
No, okay. Sorry.
So you might end up having, Gawn having a field day marking the ball, which he's not had a great few weeks marking it, and probably Weideman kicks 7 or 8.
Well, look, that's what we want. If it takes a Collingwood game like that to get him into form, great. Did either of you watch the Carlton West Coast game at the SCG on Sunday afternoon?
Yes.
Did you see the effect the sun has on watching the game?
Yeah, it was really critical, particularly in the first half. Players just simply couldn't see the ball. It was quite amazing,
and it was hard to watch as well on the TV.
It was. I'm
hoping for a cloudy day.
Yeah, we bit of weather is needed in Sydney over the next 7 days. So, hopefully it won't be as bad as that. But what was I thought was interesting from that game was just how far ahead of the middle of the range teams we are at the moment. The way we play, Carlton were just awful. They had multiple opportunities to win the game, and they just couldn't. It was exactly watching us a couple of years ago. West Coast weren't much better. I don't think there'll be any threat whatsoever come finals time this year, while they're missing a few players.
A few players.
But
6 or 7 All-Australians, or at least 3 or 4 All-Australians.
Yeah.
Pity we're not playing them now.
Yeah. But that wasn't the West Coast side that we've come to see in the past. But Carlton were very, very, very ordinary in this, and obviously their season's shot But it'll be interesting.
The interesting thing about that game, I did watch a bit of it, was the sort of philosophy about, doesn't it, which wins, offense or defense. And, you compare Melbourne and Carlton, who came into this season with lots of people picking Carlton to finish ahead of us. And their problem is their defensive structure is all over the shop. But they're just one-on-one. They've got Wiedering. They've got some really good players back there. Wiedering is a genuine star, but they've got no defensive system. And so they can't stop. They just couldn't stop the ball transitioning. They couldn't sort of slow West Coast down, or when they got going, and that's the problem with a game plan that's built around scoring more than the opposition instead of stopping them scoring is flawed. And I think that's one of the exciting things, as I said before, about how we play now, is that you can appreciate that defensive system and the structure and all of that stuff. But when we do get going and when we roll over the top of teams, we can put 5 or 6 goals on, which is why that third quarter was just one of the best quarters of footy the D's have played for, I don't know how long. It was just such an exciting quarter of footy. And, once we get going, we can roll over teams offensively, as well as anyone else in the AFL.
Well, I think we might leave it there. There were a couple of other things I wanted to talk about, but I reckon if we start getting into it, this show will go a lot longer. We can probably talk about this next week as well, just in terms of Viney. I wanted to talk about whether he was an automatic inclusion into the team. So I think we can leave it. It's still relevant come next week, heading into the bye. Welcome to a few new draft picks. We had the mid-season draft. Most likely these guys won't see much action this year, but you never know. Kai DeClass, is that his name? Not sure how to say it. And who was the other guy? Daniel Turner was the other guy. And also in the AFLW, we traded for Taylor Harris. Is coming back to Demonland.
It's exciting, isn't it? We've really struggled in the AFLW with our forwards in this season. I think that might be the difference. This is the opportunity. The premiership window is open for the girls as well, and I think Taylor will make a huge difference up forward.
We need someone to mark and kick goals, don't we?
Yeah.
That was a huge issue for us in the second, or really the finals as well. But we need to be able to grab the ball and mark it down there and kick some goals, that's for sure.
The other thing I just wanted to quickly mention, 50,000 members. We hit it for only the second time ever early in the week, last week. Great effort by all. And you'd think if we would have been a more normal year where, they could sell tickets outside the ground, because I'm not sure they could do that this year, would have had a few more. But I guess success will bring the people out. So 50,000 is fantastic.
I was astounded that we had 3,500 obviously members turn up to that Sydney game. So that's a promising scenario in any case, that we got 3,500 people up in Sydney.
Yeah, that was good. And you could really hear, I think in the first half they were really going hard on the canned sounds, but in the last half you really sort of could hear the crowd getting into it. So, yeah, that was good.
What sort of crowd do you expect for the SCG on Monday?
I guess it depends on whether Sydney people are going to come out to watch. You'd think there'd be Collingwood would have quite a much larger base of supporters up there than we do. They're not going too good this year, but they've had the win this week. They might want to go see their team play. Because I'm sure there's not that many opportunities for them to do that. So that's another factor. So you'll get some in there. You'll get the 3,000 Melbourne plus some others. And it's all going to come down to the Sydney fans, whether they come out and embrace the big freeze. I don't know how much they're advertising it or what they're doing to try and get people to come. But I don't think you'll have what we had for Dreamtime, but hopefully it doesn't look like the West Coast Carlton game.
Yeah, yeah. Is it a public holiday there up in Sydney on the moment? It must be.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that only there was one other state that doesn't do it or something. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Hopefully we'll be able to watch the D's next game at the MCG against the Bombers.
Doubting that, but we'll see. Maybe the week after. All right, boys, thank you very much. Thank you, Binman. Thank you, George. Thank you to Terence calling in. Thank you to everyone in the chat room. We'll be back next week. Go Demons.
Go Redlegs.